Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the class. So today we're going to go over World War II, okay, and how it came about, how Hitler was able to rise to power, and how Nazi became the political agenda for the country of Germany. But before we do that, we're going to get into um, just a review of the previous lesson, right? So if y'all remember correctly, World War One was called the War to End All Wars, right? So this was the world in war, essentially. It started on July 28th, 1914, and ended on November 11th, 1918. Just to talk about some of the things that came out of World War One during the fighting. So the major struggle for both sides was because of trench warfare. This is where the army would dig down into the ground, just a body width length or a little bit wider, a little bit deeper than the head of their soldiers. And they would build this for miles and miles. And both sides would have these trenches, right? And this is where the soldiers would live for months, weeks at a time, which is not a very clean area. Infections, diseases was running rampant during this. Not to mention the war that was going on around these guys. To do any type of advance, they would have to try to push into what they would call the no man's land, which is, if you imagine both sets of trenches right here, and then you would have this desolate land mass in the middle. And nobody could run out there without fear of being shot or having artillery rain down on them. Just a bad place to be. And nobody wanted to venture into no man's land because the possibilities of them dying to try to make 2 feet is great, right? I mean, it was just try to run out there and get shot. And they would see their buddies do this over and over, and just demoralizing, really. However, after World War One, when the dust settles, there's a couple different things that come out of it. So first, right off the bat, we have the Treaty of Versailles. And this treaty was the armistice between the Central Powers, Germany, and the Allied powers, France, Britain, America, the unconditional surrender of Germany. But what this did, this is putting Germany in a very bad place economically and just for their country in general. So with the Treaty of Versailles, Germany had to take full blame for the war. With this blame, they had to pay back all these other countries for the damages caused. They could not have a military greater than 100,000 men. They had their Air Force stripped away, their Navy stripped away. So they are literally at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to a world power. And this is a big struggle for a lot of German citizens. There's starvation, unemployment is rampant in Germany. So it's not a good time to be German at that point. The other thing that happens is the formation of the League of Nations, right? And you would feel like when all these countries got together and did this, that it would be some sort of effective counterbalance to all these dictatorships and countries wanting to go to war. Well, the League of Nations was a good idea in theory, right? So instead of going to war with another country, they would pose economic sanctions on them, limiting their trade, imports, exports coming out and into the countries. And that was all well and good. But the bad thing about the League of Nations, if you remember, is they didn't have any strength to go along with it. They did not have any way of enforcing these new sanctions that they put on these countries. So effectively, they didn't do anything for the world. It was just a lot of sitting around discussion, putting sanctions on countries that didn't really care about the sanctions. You know, it didn't bother them. So the League of Nations was kind of null and void right from the get-go. So to move forward, right after World War I, we're going to get into how the Nazi Party came to be, how Hitler rose to power. It wasn't just Hitler coming along and being like, "Hey, I want to lead something, right? I want to be a leader." No, it was through a series of steps, right? And he did want to be a leader. He wanted to be the leader of Germany, but it took a few years to get to this point. So what we have here is we got a TED-Ed video, and it's going to go over the rise of Hitler, and it's going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've talked about so far, but it's going to go into a little bit more depth on how Hitler came to be. So y'all pay attention.
How did Adolf Hitler, a tyrant who orchestrated one of the largest genocides in human history, rise to power in a democratic country? The story begins at the end of World War I. With the successful Allied advance in 1918, Germany realized the war was unwinnable and signed an armistice ending the fighting. As its imperial government collapsed, civil unrest and worker strikes spread across the nation. Fearing a communist revolution, major parties joined to suppress the uprisings, establishing the parliamentary Weimar Republic. One of the new government's first tasks was implementing the peace treaty imposed by the Allies. In addition to losing over a tenth of its territory and dismantling its army, Germany had to accept full responsibility for the war and pay reparations, debilitating its already weakened economy. All this was seen as a humiliation by many nationalists and veterans. They wrongly believed the war could have been won if the army hadn't been betrayed by politicians and protesters. For Hitler, these views became obsession, and his bigotry and paranoid delusions led him to pin the blame on Jews. His words found resonance in a society with many anti-Semitic people. By this time, hundreds of thousands of Jews had integrated into German society, but many Germans continued to perceive them as outsiders. After World War I, Jewish success led to ungrounded accusations of subversion and war profiteering. It cannot be stressed enough that these conspiracy theories were born out of fear, anger, and bigotry, not fact. Nonetheless, Hitler found success with them. When he joined a small nationalist political party, his manipulative public speaking launched him into its leadership and drew increasingly larger crowds. Combining anti-Semitism with populist resentment, the Nazis denounced both communism and capitalism as international Jewish conspiracies to destroy Germany. The Nazi Party was not initially popular. After they made an unsuccessful attempt at overthrowing the government, the party was banned, and Hitler jailed for treason. But upon his release about a year later, he immediately began to rebuild the movement. And then, in 1929, the Great Depression happened. It led to American banks withdrawing their loans from Germany, and the already struggling German economy collapsed overnight. Hitler took advantage of the people's anger, offering them convenient scapegoats and a promise to restore Germany's former greatness. Mainstream parties proved unable to handle the crisis, while left-wing opposition was too fragmented by internal squabbles. And so, some of the frustrated public flocked to the Nazis, increasing their parliamentary votes from under 3% to over 18% in just 2 years. In 1932, Hitler ran for president, losing the election to decorated war hero General von Hindenburg. But with 36% of the vote, Hitler had demonstrated the extent of his support. The following year, advisors and business leaders convinced Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as chancellor, hoping to channel his popularity for their own goals. Though the chancellor was only the administrative head of parliament, Hitler steadily expanded the power of his position. While his supporters formed paramilitary groups and fought protesters in the streets, Hitler raised fears of a communist uprising and argued that only he could restore law and order. Then, in 1933, a young worker was convicted of setting fire to the parliament building. Hitler used the event to convince the government to grant him emergency powers. Within a matter of months, freedom of the press was abolished. Other parties were disbanded, and anti-Jewish laws were passed. Many of Hitler's early radical supporters were arrested and executed, along with potential rivals. And when President Hindenburg died in August 1934, it was clear there would be no new election. Disturbingly, many of Hitler's early measures didn't require mass repression. His speeches exploited people's fear and ire to drive their support behind him and the Nazi Party. Meanwhile, businessmen and intellectuals wanting to be on the right side of public opinion endorsed Hitler. They assured themselves and each other that his more extreme rhetoric was only for show. Decades later, Hitler's rise remains a warning of how fragile democratic institutions can be in the face of angry crowds and a leader willing to feed their anger and exploit their fears.
All right. So, very, very good information. Now that y'all have that, with a little bit of background on Hitler, again. All right, so now we're going to split y'all up into 4 different groups with the breakout function on Zoom here. And I'm going to name y'all the 4 different groups of Hitler's army groups. So Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. So group 1 is U4. Group 2 is U4. Group 3, and it'll put y'all into y'all's own little breakup groups. So in each group, we're going to go over 4 different questions, and I got them wrote down here. If you want to take a screenshot or write these down real quick, you're more than welcome to. But each group is going to pick a question, discuss it amongst the group, and then once we all come back as a class, you will demonstrate what y'all think the answer to those questions are, and then we'll go over it as a classroom, as a class altogether. So question number 1, who defeated Hitler during the presidential campaign for Germany? All right. What event allowed Hitler, this is question 2, what event allowed Hitler to take over full control over Germany? Question 3, people of Germany thought they could have won World War I. What did they say was the cause of Germany not winning? And question number 4, why was Hitler appointed chancellor over the parliament? Y'all take about 5 minutes, think about these. They were in the video that we just watched, so just think about it, and we'll come back together in just a second. All right, welcome back. I'm glad each one of y'all got about 5 minutes to go over each question, and y'all picked which one y'all wanted, so we're going to go down the list here. So question 1, who defeated Hitler during the presidential campaign for Germany? Anybody got a... All right, go ahead. Yeah, that is a long name for a man. Paul Ludwig von Anton von Breckin-Orff und von Hindenburg. He was the man that defeated Hitler for the presidential campaign of Germany after World War I. He was better known as Paul Hindenburg. He was a decorated general during World War I, and he was the 2nd president of the Weimar Republic. During his time, as y'all remember, this is right after World War I, it is stricken with economic hardships and political parties, and also the rise of Hitler, whom himself appointed in 1933 as the chancellor. And I think that's one of our questions here in a minute. So good job on that answer. All right, question 2, group 3. How do y'all answer on question 2? Okay, right. So let's talk about it as a class. What event allowed Hitler to take over full control of Germany? He did this because, like it said in the video, a fire broke out in the Reichstag building, which is Parliament, in Berlin, and it was a young Dutch communist who confessed to starting it. That could be a false confession. We don't know. Hitler used this episode to convince President Hindenburg to declare an emergency decree suspending many civil liberties like freedom of speech, freedom of press, people couldn't gather. He used these laws to, like it said in the video, to take over or push forward many anti-Jewish laws and things like that. So this fire really gave Hitler majority of his power and gave him the ability to take over Germany as a whole. All right, group number 4. We got question number 3. People in Germany thought they could have won World War I. Why did they say that? Oh, what did they say was the cause of Germany not winning? Group number 4. Right. The people of Germany and veterans of Germany said they could have won it if it wasn't for the politicians and the protesters protesting the war. So, yeah, I still don't think they could have won, but the people and the idea was they could have, right? They could have held out even longer and developed more as an army if it would have kept going. But there just wasn't enough time. And with the United States coming into the war, they just couldn't survive it. All right, and question number 4 for group number 2. Why was Hitler appointed chancellor over Parliament? Y'all are correct. Very good. So President Hindenburg wanted to use the Nazi Party's influence for his own goals. He wanted to use that influence to gather more people up under him. The Nazi Party had a vast network of individuals that wanted the same ideas and ideology as Hitler. And like I said, Hindenburg just wanted to use some of that influence to bring Germany back under a proper control. So good job, guys, and way to watch that video. Proud of y'all. And now we're going to move over. This was supposed to be in the classroom to our Chromebooks. Y'all just open up a Google tab and open up your peer deck of our class. I'm going to have my teacher side pulled up here, but I'm also going to have y'all's slide pulled up here. So go ahead and sign into Peer Deck and using the code CMKWG, go ahead and join my presentation. That code again is Charlie, Mike, Kilo, Whiskey, Golf. That's the last one, Golf. All right. So how are you feeling today? I'm doing good. I hope everybody else is still doing good. All right. So to continue with what we're saying, we're going to go into the calm before the storm, or we're still talking about the calm before the storm, and that's that period of time between World War I and World War II, where everything's kind of turbulent, to say the least, right? So, like we were discussing earlier, the war was still in many facts a continuation of World War I. A lot of things were left unsettled, like where the countries go, who takes over countries, and what happens to Germany during all this. The beginning of World War II started on September 1st in 1939, and this was when Germany finally invaded Poland. Great Britain and France responded with the German invasion by declaring war on Germany on September 3rd of 1939. So, and we all know that Adolf Hitler wanted to get back Poland because of it was what he thought was the German right to take that land, and he needed breathing room, if you will, for the German people. So that was his justifications for taking Poland. And what I want y'all to realize is before he took Poland, he had to take a couple other countries. But before we get into that, I'm going to allow y'all to figure out where each one of these countries are, right? So we have 4 different flags at the bottom of the screen, right? We got a gray one, we got a green one, we got a purple one, and we got a blue one. That gray flag is for Germany. It's not a red flag, it's gray. So what I want y'all to do is I want y'all to take each flag right here and I want you to deposit it on which country you think it is. So this red flag right here for Germany, or gray on the thing, it goes on Germany. So y'all take a few minutes, y'all finish that up, and I want to see where y'all think all these other flags need to be. All right. So I see that everybody's pretty much finished their pinpoint, and let me look right here. Yes, it looks like everybody's got their flags on their countries labeled correctly. That is correct. All right, good job, guys. So the reason I want y'all to understand where these countries are is because Europe is kind of condensed, if you will. So all these countries are near one another. And that's going to have a huge role to play in just a second. So we're going to get into a few questions talking about the rest of this lesson. How in the world did Germany overtake Poland in only 2 weeks? To know that, we got to go into a few vocab words and stuff like that. But the other questions you will be able to answer: what countries were overtaken in that process of overtaking of Poland? And then the last question I want you to think about in the back of your mind is, why was Hitler even looking at overtaking Poland? What was the purpose of it, right? And to understand some of these points that we're going to make, I need to allow you to copy this down and understand what some of these words that we're going to be talking about later on are. So words like the Führer, or it means the supreme leader, right? This is the title that Hitler uses before and during World War II. It just means that he is the dictator. He's the man, if you will. He's the top dog. All right, and then we'll get into his Luftwaffe. This was the German Air Force that Hitler started constructing in secrecy in about mid-1930s. And the Luftwaffe was very important for this next vocab word, which is the Blitzkrieg. The Blitzkrieg was a military tactic used by the Nazis in order to break through the front lines of enemy soldiers very fast. So what they would do is they would break through a front line and go back to one of these maps. So they would break through the front line and just push deep into enemy territory. Now, what this was doing is, as soon as they pushed deep into that enemy territory, 2 divisions would come around, leaving that enemy group essentially cut off from any reinforcements or any supplies, and they would take them as prisoners. So the Blitzkrieg was very, very important in dominating Poland so fast. They would use what our last definition is Panzer tanks, right? This was a type of tank that Germany developed during the calm period. And this tank was very fast. It was mobile. It was strong. France and Great Britain, they didn't have very updated tanks. No country really had updated tanks. And they were old and slow. Sometimes they didn't work. But the Panzers would be able to defeat them very quickly, very, very quickly. So, but what I want you to understand, it just wasn't one tank with a bunch of army guys. No, the new idea that Hitler had was to put tanks in divisions. And divisions is like numerous companies all up under one umbrella. So he would have 4 different companies of tanks with, just for the sake of argument, say 25 tanks apiece, and then all 100 of those would go up into the division, right? And the division would have control over all those tanks. So what Hitler would do is he would use this one division with all these tanks and power through the front lines of these enemies and essentially break through and cut deep into it. And then 2 divisions would meet up and cut off all those soldiers or troops, and those troops would be taken as POWs, or prisoners of war, right? So it was a very effective tactic to use, very effective. Okay, what I want y'all to see here is I got this map specifically because all these little rough edges on this map is actually a mountain range, right? So tanks and stuff like that couldn't really get over these mountain ranges very well. But if you'll notice that Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia are kind of in purple, right? And if you look at the legend, these are annexations of these 2 countries. And what happened is that Germany needed a starting off point. They wanted to try to get as much around Poland as they could. As you see, it kind of cups Poland there. But what this does is it allows Germany to have a bigger front line for that bigger push, right? So before the war even started and before the invasion of Poland even started, Germany took over Austria. That was their first one. And this is where the League of Nations should have done something, right? But they didn't. They didn't have any muscle. They just put sanctions on Germany. But Germany wasn't really worried about those sanctions, right? They're in the mindset of, hey, I'm going to go conquer things. I'm going to go do things. So those sanctions didn't do anything, and they just kept going with what they're doing. Well, next thing they did was they took over parts of Czechoslovakia, and what this did was give Germany a bigger border to invade Poland, right, and get into Warsaw. So on September 1st, Hitler lined up all his army against this border against Poland, right? And he lined all his tanks and divisions and infantry and uses his air force to push into Poland. Well, he had 4 different groups push into Poland, and they're really easy to remember: Army Group A, B, C, and D. Right, but he did it very strategically. So with Army Group A, he went around close to Lithuania and then came into Poland or Warsaw that way. Where Army Group B would just drive straight across and hit Warsaw. Army Group C would come up, go around this little mountain range right here and hit Warsaw. And then Army Group D would come down on the other side of the mountain ranges and come in from the backside of it. So what you have is all 4 of these army groups essentially cutting off groups of soldiers here, 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 and here, right? So they couldn't get any reinforcements. No other country was coming to Poland's aid at this time. So France and Great Britain couldn't put a bunch of tanks or a bunch of men over there immediately. So the Polish army was just decimated within 2 weeks, and wasn't really anything they could do. The Blitzkrieg tactic just pushed in, and they could not survive it. On the other side, they had Russia, who had signed a secret agreement with Germany, if you remember correctly. They signed a secret agreement with Germany, and that allowed them to split Poland in 2. So the western half going to Germany, eastern half going to Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time. Okay. So in response, Great Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3rd. And this is where historically we recognize World War II starting. So I got a little question for y'all to think about. Would you, if you were France or Great Britain and you just got out of this war with Germany and all these things, would you come to the rescue of Poland? Would you send your troops there? Knowing what you know now, would you have staged troops there beforehand when Hitler was taking over Austria-Hungary and Czechoslovakia? Would you have put troops and supplies there beforehand? I'll give you about 2 minutes to think about that. All right. So I can tell y'all personally that I probably would have been just like Great Britain and France. Both of my countries were struggling at the time. We had just got out of World War I. We had lost a bunch of troops. Nobody was wanting to go back to war. So they were putting all their faith into the League of Nations and hopefully thinking that they would do something about it. But unfortunately, the League of Nations was not the answer. So, yeah, I can see where it's kind of bad that they didn't come to their aid immediately. But I can see whereas, hey, if we're going to get into another world war, then I need to save my troops and give it the best option to begin with. So, like we talked about, other countries would not come into the World War II for a while, talking about U.S. and Italy and stuff like that. What a lot of people don't realize is the Soviet Union had that secret partnership with Germany there for a little bit. And that's another reason Poland was overran so fast. It's because they had the Germans coming in on the west side of them, and they had the Russians coming in on the east side, and it was just a shock and awe. They couldn't do anything about it. And like it says here, that partnership allowed Germany to invade Poland unhindered. There was nothing stopping them. And which ultimately, like I said, it only took 2 weeks for Germany to get all the way to Warsaw and collapse that country. So that's going to be the end of our lesson today. And right here at the end, I got to check your knowledge. So these 3 questions will be taken up for a grade. I'll take it through Peer Deck right here, and we can see. So we're going to go into the very first question. I'm going to let y'all answer it. So what was created in secrecy that had a profound effect on the German military advancements? Was it A, fast-moving tanks? Was it B, the newly created Air Force? Or was it C, Hitler's personal style of mustache trimming? I'll give you a few seconds. All right. Good. All right, next question. How did Hitler gain control over Germany? Did he take out a sword out of the stone in front of Parliament? Did President Hindenburg appoint Hitler as the chancellor over Parliament to use it to use the Nazi Party's influence? Or did he take over Parliament with a military coup? This was enforced by SS paramilitary groups. It's up to y'all. All right. Very last question, and y'all can go. What was the major factor in overrunning the country of Poland so fast? Was it A, Hitler's fleet of U-boats, B, the use of the Blitzkrieg, or C, the use of trench warfare? All right. All right, and I will take y'all's responses and I'll put them in the grade book, and I'll give you your grades back next class. So just to go over what we're going over next time we meet, we will talk about Japan's involvement into the war, Italy's involvement into the war, and how some of the major battles started happening at the beginning of World War II. So y'all have a good day, and till next time.